Welcome back to Media 7. We're talking about the Official Information Act, how it works and how it doesn't, with Nikki Hager, the Dom Post Hayden Dews and PSA Chief Brenda Pilot. Now, Brenda, one of the things the Act is supposed to protect is free and frank advice from officials to ministers. I know, again, it's another war story, I know of a civil servant who was hauled over the coals for giving perfectly reasonable advice on policy, but making the mistake of doing it by email. Do you think the degree of risk averseness and caution has a chilling effect on good advice? Because that would be a concern, wouldn't it?
It's probably the most tricky area of the whole of the Official Information Act, is this question about free and frank advice, and I certainly know that there are lots of workarounds that are used. Increasingly, people are charged with not putting information on paper, so we've got more verbal briefings going on, and generally the environment which is meant to be encouraging public participation in the development of policy does not seem to have eventuated through, what, 20, nearly 30 years now of the Official Information Act. It is quite a difficult area, and certainly lots of advice on policy in the developmental stage is withheld on the grounds of free and frank advice. And of course, once you get to the policy process, inevitably the ministers and the Minister's Office staff will become involved in the release of Official Information Act requests. And so that, that really does become something that is quite challenging for public servants who may have, an ethos that this information should be made available, and then of course the Minister's Office people, have some different imperatives that are driving them.
Hayden, do you respect that protection in the Act for official advice? Do you think it's important that there can be free and frank advice?
There should always be free and frank advice, but I would argue that information should be given in its entirety to the media or to the public who are interested in this. I mean, you need to know what decision processes people went through to come to that final piece of policy, what things were thrown out. That tells you more about a government or about a group than things that they do.
But the response from the Minister's Office will be, but yeah, if we give you guys this, you'll just put it on the front page like it's policy and ruin the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, there are protections there that people can get a fair play in the media. There's the Press Council, there's the Broadcasting Standards Authority.
Which are all after the fact. It's a little bit late.
Yeah, but in saying that, I mean, we're always going to say that we've got to look at what goes on behind closed doors, and the government at this stage is putting up the barriers rather than taking them away.
What do you make of that, Nikki? Is there a benchmark for advice that should be protected, or should none of it be protected?
Well, perhaps it's because I come from Wellington, but I feel sympathy for public servants who have to produce policy, generate ideas, do things fast. They can't protect themselves, they can be dumped on, they can find themselves in the news even. And so I think they deserve a certain amount of protection. But the trouble with the Act at the moment is that when they use a term like free and frank advice to officials, that can include practically every single piece of paper in the public service, which is advice coming from officials. And there's a common sense way of looking at it, which is that perhaps there's a stage of the process where people should be allowed to talk and discuss things and write down their notes of the meeting without it being on the front page of the paper. But then after that, we've got a right to know. And we've particularly got a right to know before the decision is made, or where was the public in that decision? So I think a bit of common sense, and it can all work.
And of course now we get the workaround. The Act requires agencies to deliver all the information that's held, so they don't hold it, it's all verbal. What's been the effect of that?
Well, it's actually very interesting when you do these things to go into the National Archives and pull out any old papers from a government department. People used to write a little note of the phone call they received and stick it on the file. It's an amazing culture change. And nowadays you'll get these slick, politicised senior public servants. And if you look at their emails, if you're ever lucky enough to get them, they're these terse four-word replies or nothing written down. You get PR people coming into them and saying, it's really good that we're open with the public on this one, but don't write anything down, There is a great big fight going on between the PR people and the real public servants and the Democrats in these things. And if they've got the ways to get out, if there are loopholes in the Act, if there are tricks that they can get away with, and there are no penalties, which there aren't, I've got things which the Labour government didn't give me. You wait years, they go out of power, you'll never get it. If there's no penalties, then some people will use them, and that's where it really needs to be tightened up.
Brenda, do you see that distinction that Nikki just made between the real public servants and the spin doctors?
I think the real challenge in all of this, in this issue, is between the public servants and the ministerial advisors. You know, they are the people who are operating under a different ethos. You know, they're there to protect their minister, who's often a political ally. They're mostly political appointments. They're not covered by the State Service Code of Conduct. You know, they have no code of conduct, in fact, that's governing them. Their information is not discoverable. And it's
which is extraordinary in itself.
It is, and it's probably an area that needs looking at. And I know there is some consideration being given about whether beehive material, for want of a better word, it should be subject to the Official Information Act. And you know, there are some arguments, I think, to suggest that they should be. But I do believe that the things that get really tricky usually end up at that point with a bit of a push and pull between public servants who, you know, generally I think are trying to, you know, do their best to act lawfully, which they're charged to do, and to be helpful, actually to be politically neutral. And I think, you know, what we're seeing with the Official Information Act is a symptom of the politicisation of the public service that's gone on. The fact that public servants need to even think about what are the political ramifications of this, to the degree that they may choose to hold on to information rather than releasing it.
Now, you've actually got something that touches on this with the new government. You made your own Official Information Act request. Now,
I did.
There's nothing on those.
No, well, we'd heard it's sort of, you know, talk around Wellington that there's a list of words that public servants are not allowed to use when they're talking to ministers, words like social justice or strategy. And
Big words.
Big words, that's right, multisyllabic words. So we thought, well, let's find out whether that's true. So we sent an Official Information Act to all the government departments, and this particular one has sent us a memo that's headed up Writing for Our New Ministers, and it's, 5 pages long. And you would think that every single word of this 5-page memo was relevant to our Official Information Act request. But as I hope can see, it's all expunged, and the words irrelevant material removed are right across it. So, you know, there's a piece of judgment that's gone on that I believe that this would embarrass the government if it became known that public servants
they
were
simply
actually
deem it irrelevant.
Well, irrelevant is not a grounds for exclusion under the Official Information Act. So we've got we're going back to them and saying those are not grounds, and you know, we'll get the Ombudsman on this story.
Good luck with that. Now, but before we finish, you mentioned changes you would like to see, a refreshing of the Act. Briefly, what would those be? Nikki first.
We've kind of got, they've been mentioned along the way. The time limits need to be tightened, but even if the current time limits would be good if they could be enforced. And I think one idea which has been around is that there's actually penalties on chief executives and government departments that don't.
And these have to fall on the chief executive, not on the frontline public servant.
Of course not the poor junior official who did the first draft of the letter. There are also exclusion clauses which sounded like a good idea in 1982 to do with national security and commercial confidentiality, which have been stretched and abused beyond any of their original intention, which could be tightened up. And there could be more resources going into this, because if you've got the political party research units deluging government departments, and you've got PR people doing it, and you've got other people like that putting lots of load on those officials who have to do this, it makes it harder for the rest of us, and having extra resources would really help the system to work.
Anything to add to that?
The Ombudsman really struggles with dealing with these complaints as well. Beverly Wakin, the Chief Ombudsman, said just before Christmas that they've had a 10% rise year on year of complaints to the Ombudsman. Anyone who's complained knows it takes a hell of a long time to get something through there. If they don't have the resources to tackle these government departments, and she did say that government departments are gaming the media and deliberately delaying, then it's going to carry on.
Well, I'm not letting you go just yet, but we do have something completely different to go to. There is still time for a news mash. This week we're blinding you with science. Pay close attention to the dial. After the breakfast host repaid Greenpeace's Stephanie Mills for her time last week by mocking her appearance,
I thought, that is a moustache on a lady. It was a moustache on a lady, I just noticed it.
and then doing it again,
And how hard can it be to wax?
the nation's internet forums were seized with the question, just how much of a dick is Paul Henry? Not at all, according to some folks.
Good on him. Freedom of speech. That lady should have made an effort, seeing as she was on live TV.
Others were less impressed.
He thinks he's Ricky Gervais, but he's actually David Brent.
It was a moustache on a lady. I just noticed it.
So, our burning question, just how much of a dick is Paul Henry, remains apparently unresolved. We here at Media 7 decided to apply some science with the assistance of the dickometer. To gain a measure of the particular level of dickishness in this instance, we'll run some past dickish episodes through the dickometer.
So you've got one row of seats occupied only by these people.
Laughing at his own joke? Well, he does that all the time, so that's only a 1 on the meter. But it was a joke about deaf people, so that bumps it up to a 2.
No, a lot of old people need to go to the toilet a lot, quite frankly.
A joke about wee-wees. Sorry, but that's too lame to even be dickish. It's just embarrassing. No bells.
How do you get salmonella from fresh tomatoes?
Who knows?
I suppose it could just be some of those Hispanic people that pick them.
Ah, now that's a bit more like it. Some idle racism. Look out, punters, it's a 3.
Did he imagine in his wildest dreams a woman could drive a boat?
Women can do anything,
No,
including drive
you're
boats.
absolutely wrong. They can't. They have no grasp at all of technology. I'm sorry.
Ah, we're getting here now. Hackneyed chauvinism, embarrassing a junior colleague, but still only a 3.
And I'm no gynecologist.
You go right ahead.
But a time when a woman most needs to be physically fit, you know, the lead up to it is, take things easy, you know, you just look after yourself. Whereas in these other countries, you know, you work them like navvies.
Our babies survive and often theirs don't.
Oh, you make a minor point. But they have enough babies to take care of that. Don't worry about that. We've got 6 others out the back.
Oh yeah, now we're cooking. Embarrassing a colleague, double points because she's pregnant and she really can't be bothered with this bullshit. And some real gold-plated wealthy white guy humour. That has to be a 4. Yes! So we go back to the test case.
God, there's a lady with a moustache. Don't mention it.
Let's make a list. Laughing at own jokes, check. Infantilising the news, check. Embarrassing a colleague, check. Butt-headed sexism, check. Humiliating a guest appearing in good faith, check. And needlessly insulting a viewer, check. 5 bells! Yes, it's the dick pot. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a wiener. Well, that is our show for this week, both our 50th program and our 1-year anniversary. Thank you to our panellists, Nikki Hager, Hayden Dews and Brenda Pilot, and to Tim Pankhurst. And thank you for watching, especially if you've been with us from the start. We'll be back with Media 7 next week. Until then, goodbye.